Okay, so continuing on from the last video, let's explore some more widgets that are available in Tkinter. The first one we'll cover in this video is the menu button. And the menu button is essentially a button that we can click on in the main app window, which will then present another list of options of its own. So let's say I wanted to create a button which was labelled options, and when you do click on the options button, it comes back with 3 check buttons for which you can select either delete, upload, or save. So we'll first of all create a variable called root and set this equal to a call on the TK class. We can then set the menu button, so we'll create a variable labelled MB for menu button, and this will be set equal to a call on the menu button class. We'll pass in root as the first argument, and the text on the menu button will simply set equal to the string options. I can then put the menu button in the main app window by putting mb.grid and setting the row parameter equal to 0, i.e. place this menu button in the first row. So with the main menu button now placed in the app, we can now set the options that we want to appear when the menu button is clicked. And the way we do this is by setting a variable, so we can set one called mb_menu, and we can set this equal to a call on the menu class. Inside the menu class parentheses, we can pass in the element that we want to place this menu within. And seeing as we've created a menu button above, we're going to pass in MB into parentheses. Now in order to get the menu options appearing underneath the menu button, we then need to put MB, so accessing the menu button itself, and then in square brackets, we need to pass in the option menu as a string. We're then going to set this menu option to equal the MB_menu variable that we created above. So with this now set, we can add our options. So if I put MB_menu and then access a method called add_check button, inside parentheses I can pass in a parameter called label and set this equal to the string delete. If I copy and paste this twice more and then change the second label to be upload and then change the third label to be save. If I finish by putting root.mainLoop with parentheses and then run this code cell, you can see that when I drag the application across, we have a button which states options, and when I click on this options button, we get a menu with 3 items, delete, upload, and save, and I can select on each of these accordingly. Now notice here that because we've added a check button, when I do select one of these items and then click on options, you'll see that a little tick appears next to it. So a menu button is a good option if you want the menu to stay in the window at all times. But maybe you want an application that contains a ribbon with different options, maybe a file menu, maybe a help menu, a little bit like you'd see in Excel or any other application. Well, the way we can achieve this is by utilising the menu widget itself. And the menu widget can be used to create all kinds of menus in an application. So let me carry out a simple example where we create a ribbon which has 2 items, one labelled file and one labelled help, and then inside each of these menus respectively are options that a user can select. So once again we'll set a variable called root and we'll set this equal to TK. We will also set a variable called menu and we'll set this equal to a call on the menu class, in which we'll pass in the main app window which is stored in root. We then need to configure resources of a widget, so what we need to write next is root.config, and then we need to set the parameter labelled menu to equal the value menu. And what this will essentially do is associate the following menu definitions with the main application that we're storing in a variable called root. So the first menu option that we'll address is the file menu. So we'll set a variable called file menu and we'll set this equal to a call on the menu class, in which we'll pass in the variable menu which we created above, i.e. the main menu of the application. We can then specify that we want menu.add_cascade, which is essentially going to represent the options available when a user clicks on this menu option. We can set the label to equal file, and we can then set the menu to equal file menu, which we defined above. we can now add our menu options. So if I put file menu dot add underscore command and set the label to equal new, I can then copy and paste this 2 more times. We'll change new to be open, and the third option we'll have as save. If I wanted to put a separator in there, I could put file menu dot add underscore separator, and this will then put a line after the save option. We can then put file menu dot add underscore command, so we'll add one more option. We'll set the label equal to exit, and what we'll do is we'll set the command equal to root.destroy, so that when the exit button is selected, the app will close down. So this will address the file menu section. Let's just create a very small help menu section. So if we set a help menu equal to menu and then pass in the main app menu, I can then copy and paste the add underscore cascade method code line and then change the label to equal help. And let's just add one item. We'll simply put help menu dot add underscore command, and we'll set the label to equal contact. When I now put root.main loop and then run this code cell, notice that our application window has 2 items across the top in a ribbon-like format. When I click on File, you can see that we have some options: New, Open, and Save. We then have a separator, and we have the option Exit, which we know when we click on will close this application. I also have a help menu, which when I scroll over brings up the option Contact, which obviously could be selected if there was functionality associated with it, which would then help the user accordingly. So you can do some very cool things with menus and provide your users different functionality which is accessible via menu options. This will just keep your UI much cleaner rather than incorporating multiple buttons in the app window itself. Let's continue with a few more widgets. Next up is the radio button. So if I set a variable called root equal to tk, I will then set a value placeholder for integer variables, so I can set a variable called v equal to int var with parentheses, and this will be used as an argument in our radio button class. We can now set 3 radio button options, so we'll call upon the radio button class, we'll pass in the argument root as the first argument, we'll have the text of the first radio button to equal opt-in, we'll set the variable parameter to equal v, and we'll have the value associated with this radio button to equal 1. We can then just pack this into the app window, so if we put .pack, in parentheses we'll set the anchor parameter to equal w, so we'll anchor this to the west side. I'll now copy and paste this line of code twice more. I'll set the second radio button's text to equal opt-out, I'll set the value to equal 2, and for the third radio button I'll set the text to equal undecided, and I'll set the value to equal 3. If I now finish by putting root.main loop and then running this code cell, you can see that when I bring the application across, we have an application with 3 radio buttons. I'm able to select either opt-in, opt-out, or undecided. And you'll notice here that I'm unable to select 2 at once, and that's the nature of a radio button. It can either be one or the other, which is very useful if you want to provide functionality to your users in which you only want them to select one value from a couple of options. So that's the radio button. We can also provide our users with scale functionality. So if I put root equals tk and set a variable called w equal to a call on the scale class, the first scale will simply have as a vertical scale from 0 to 10, so I can place this in the root window, and I can then have the scale start from, so I can put the parameter from, then put an underscore, and we can set this equal to say 0 as an example. I can then set a parameter called 2, and we'll set this equal to 10. We can then just pack this scale into the app window, so if I put w.pack, I can then copy and paste these 2 lines of code. I'll change the 2 parameter to be 100 for this second example, and I'll also set the orientation of this specific scale, so I can put orient equals, and then I can put horizontal in capital letters, and this will make the scale option a horizontal bar. So if I now call root.main loop and then run this code cell, when I drag the application window across, you can see that I have two scale options, one which runs from 0 to 10 vertically, and the other runs from 0 to 100 horizontally. A good option if you want to provide your users some scale functionality. And the last widget that I'll show you, which I think is quite useful at times and is certainly one that I use quite often, is the spin box. So if I set a variable called root and set this equal to tk, I can then set a variable called w and we'll set this equal to a call on the spin box class. We can pass in the argument root as the first argument. As an example, we'll set the from underscore parameter to be equal to 0, and then we'll set the to parameter to be equal to 10. I will then simply just pack this into the app window. So if I put w.pack, you can see that when I type root.mainLoop and then run this code cell and then drag the application window across, I now get a spin box, and if I press the up arrow multiple times until we get to 10, you'll notice that I'm unable to go any further. I can select lower numbers by clicking on the down arrow here. So the spin box is a great option if you want to provide multiple options to a user in which they can press up or down accordingly. So if you think any of these widgets would be right for you in your application, feel free to explore them in more detail. There's plenty of documentation on the web. Hopefully this has given you some ideas as to what you can include in your user interfaces. Each of the widgets do come with their own styling and formatting properties that you can set, so be sure to check these out. But in the next video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can execute functions in a UI in more detail. And this will help us in subsequent videos where we'll actually start building out a calculator application. So I'll see you in the next video.